Warning, this video contains spoilers for The Village, but this movie is 16 years old. If you haven't seen it yet, I'm probably not spoiling anything for you.
Hey everyone, my name is Chris A, and today I want to talk about A Hierarchy of Rights, The Village, and the Folly of Liberty. I recently watched M. Night Shyamalan's The Village for the first time in probably a decade. It hasn't aged well. A quick refresher, a small village of people are terrorized by mysterious creatures in the surrounding woods. They've had a truce with the monsters, but the monsters are increasingly crossing the forbidden line. A mentally ill man, Noah, stabs his neighbor Lucius, who is rendered comatose. Lucius's love interest, Ivy, convinces her father, Edward, the chief elder, to let her traverse the woods and get medicine from the towns. As she travels through the woods, the twist of the film is slowly revealed. The monsters were actually the elders in disguise. The elders were just using the threat of monsters to keep the village contained from the outside world. And the big twist is that the outside world appears to be about a century ahead of the village. We learn that all the elders lost loved ones to violent crime when they lived in Manhattan in the 1970s. They all escaped the modern world and started fresh in their village. As all this is happening, Noah steals a monster costume and, we assume, tries to play a game with Ivy as she travels. Being blind, Ivy is unable to realize the creature chasing her is just someone in a costume. She escapes Noah by leading him into a convenient pit in the forest floor. When the elders learn that Ivy has killed a creature, they immediately know it's Noah. Edward, the chief elder, decides that the other villagers will be told that Noah was killed by the monsters. As a kid, I remember thinking that the elders were doing the right thing, and Shyamalan's storytelling seems to support this. The film frames their exodus from New York as being an escape from violence. And when a violent crime occurs in the village, they eventually agree to break their oath and allow someone to leave the village to save a dying man. We're told that they've made a great sacrifice, and they're only doing what they're doing to protect their children. And part of me thinks, what an idea. Get off the grid, live in a self-sustaining community that values family, education, safety. But following the logic of the film, every villager is either an elder or a direct descendant of an elder. And all those descendants have no idea where or when they really are. This means only 12 villagers have consented to this community, and everyone else is being held against their will. The village elders have imagined a utopia, which requires their total control over its citizens. They teach their children a false history, and they are in a permanent state of war with a fabricated enemy. Should have called this movie 1884. But seriously, all the elders lived in New York City as recently as the 1970s. The chief elder is a professor of US history. As such, he knows what fascism is, which leaves us with one conclusion. They're all fascists. We learn that the village is in the center of a phony wildlife sanctuary funded by Edward's billionaire father. The road surrounding the sanctuary is dotted with ranger stations every 10 miles. And here's what's in those ranger stations. Modern medicine. It's modern medicine. Which means the elders have a ton of money and access to medicine within miles. But two of our protagonists are disabled and are not receiving care consistent with what their parents are able to provide. Only when a character is maimed do they allow one person to go get some supplies a few miles down the road. And the one person allowed to leave the village is blind. Now, people who are blind are plenty capable, but it seems a little unfair to a stab victim to leave their fate on the shoulders of a blind person with a 19th century education alone in the woods, which until very recently she believed to be full of human-eating monsters. Yeah, I'm sure Lucius will be just fine. And if that's not enough to convince you they're terrible people,
we will tell the others he was killed by the creatures. Your son has made our stories real. Noah has given us a chance to continue this place.
Your son's death was a noble sacrifice necessary for the preservation of the state. Benjamin Franklin once said, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." You could say that the elders gave up their freedom for their safety, and there's some truth to that. By swearing an oath to the village, the elders have given up some freedoms. But there is no political turmoil in the film. With the exception of the chief elder who founded and bankrolled the village, the elders appear to have an equal say in all matters. Their only real disagreement comes when Edward breaks the oath to send Ivy out of the village. And that disagreement only lasts 3 minutes. So all the elders are consenting and have a decent amount of free will within the confines of the village. They haven't really given up that much freedom for the safety they've established. In fact, as elders in this village, they have much greater political power than they would have on the outside, and in that sense, more political freedom. But we can't say the same for literally anyone else in the village. They all have relative safety from violent crime, but they have essentially no freedoms. They can't leave the village, they can't contact the outside world, they are denied modern medicine, and the government is composed exclusively of their parents. It is literally a nanny state. John Locke wrote that government exists for the purpose of protecting a person's life, liberty, and estate. This was famously paraphrased as the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence, and was eventually codified by the 14th Amendment in 1868 as life, liberty, and property. So what happens when one right collides with another? The village elders deny their children liberty in order to guarantee their right to life. Although the children are totally unwitting, the elders have made a value judgment that one right is more important than another. Could they be right? They're not, but could they be? I think so. I think it's fair to say that some rights are not as important as others. Most states criminalize not wearing a seatbelt, which is arguably something a person should have the freedom to decide for themselves. And yet these laws are uncontroversial, because they exist for the sole purpose of protecting your right to life. We give up a little bit of freedom here for a right that we've deemed more important there. So rights can vary in importance, but they can also vary in degree. In the US, we certainly have more electoral power than somewhere like North Korea, but our electoral college and two-party system means that our right to vote is less protected than somewhere like Norway, or Iceland, or Sweden, or New Zealand, or Finland, or Ireland, or Denmark, or Canada, or Australia, or Switzerland, or the Netherlands, or Luxembourg, or Germany, or the UK, or Uruguay, or Austria, or Spain, or Mauritius, or Costa Rica, or France, or Chile, or Portugal, or South Korea, or Japan. Democracy. If rights can vary along these two dimensions, surely the more important a right is, the more strongly a government would protect it.
Would that it were so simple.
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 My dear boy, why do you say that? Why do you say twere?
We all know the Second Amendment guarantees our right to bear arms, or at least it does now. Not like the Founding Fathers intended. You know how they thought we needed a well-regulated militia to fight our foreign wars because a president with an army is basically a king, and then the NRA hired a bunch of phony lawyers to write journal articles interpreting the Second Amendment as everyone can have a gun until that became a talking point at the presidential level with Reagan, and in 2008 the Supreme Court, for the first time, described the Second Amendment as guaranteeing an individual right to bear arms. Even though the modern interpretation of the Second Amendment has only been law for 12 years, I'm not here to argue that it's wrong. But like any right, the right to bear arms cannot be absolute. In some states, you actually have to register your gun, a tool that was invented in 1634 to kill people. But why? When does a right need to be limited? You can't falsely yell fire in a crowded theater because theaters don't exist anymore. But also you could cause a panic and someone could get hurt. Even libertarianism, an ideology valuing freedom above all else, limits freedoms at the point of infringing on others' freedoms. Your rights can only be protected as long as they do not limit the rights of others, particularly more important rights like the right to life. This makes the right to bear arms an unusual case. It is a right that makes you more capable of denying other people their rights. It's not unreasonable to believe that your right to life is more important than my right to own a gun, and yet the biggest roadblock to effective gun control is an obsession with liberty.
But the only way we're going to do that is if we don't have a situation in which anything that is proposed is viewed as some tyrannical destruction of the Second Amendment. And that's how the issue too often gets framed.
The intersection of rights seems to be at the heart of the cause du jour for the libertarians among us. This was pretty well demonstrated in a recent congressional hearing with Dr. Anthony Fauci.
You just said that protests increase the spread. I'm just asking you, should we try to limit the protests?
No, I think I would leave that to people who have more of a position to do that. I can tell you...
Government stopping people from going to church, Dr. Fauci? Well, I'm just asking, is there a world where the Constitution says you can favor one First Amendment liberty, protesting, over another, practicing your faith?
Jim Jordan asks an important question. Is the right to peaceful protest more important than the right to free exercise of religion? Now, he's just trying to get a public health official to condemn public activity, but, you know, in another context, it's a valid question. Dr. Fauci refused to answer the question because he's a public health official, and he has no professional opinion on the importance of one constitutional right over another.
I don't understand what you're asking me as a public health official to opine on who should get arrested or not. That's not my position.
But which is more important? The two rights, peaceful assembly and religion, are not conflicting with each other, but they are both impacted by the same crisis. Depending on who you ask, it may be reasonable to limit the freedom of assembly but not the freedom of religion, or vice versa, or both should be limited but to different degrees, or neither. You could make the argument that the right to protest could earn you a right to religious practice, and therefore it's more fundamental, but that's also assuming you won't suffer eternal damnation if you can't make it to a crowded church once a week. At any rate, it's a vastly complicated topic. Slightly less complicated but fueled by the same crisis is the freedom argument against masks. I'm not going to tell you that being forced to wear a mask isn't an infringement of your rights. It is. But living in a society means giving up liberties. Even in the village, by forming a council of elders, each elder gave up some freedom. Although they've escaped the restrictions of modern life, they are voluntarily sacrificing fundamental freedoms to form this new government. Why? Well, it's the same reason we should give up our right to not wear masks. The elders give up a little freedom for the safety of their community to guarantee their right to life. Obviously, they went too far with the whole fascism thing, but anyway. And this is where I believe it becomes a matter of individual ethics. If you have abstracted the idea of freedom to such an extreme that it overrides the material reality of people dying all around you, maybe your concept of liberty isn't that great. Maybe. Just like any other abstraction we humans have developed to describe the incredibly complex human experience, maybe taking liberty to an extreme could actually endanger more people than it protects. We have the freedom to choose our private health insurance provider.
On my plan, we trust you to make the choice that's best for your family. And that's why their plan is called Medicare for All, and my plan is Medicare for All who want it.
But that just means we don't have the right to universal health care. We have the freedom to own guns, but that just means we're way more likely to get killed by a gun. We have the freedom to not wear masks, but that just means we don't have freedom from a containable disease. Don't get me wrong, liberty is soups important, obviously. But so is life and health and safety. So when someone thinks their rights are being infringed, instead of dismissing them, consider what rights are being infringed and why. Is it to protect another right? And if so, is that a worthy sacrifice? I think most of us can agree that the right to not wear a seatbelt is a small freedom to give up for a little more safety when we drive. But where do we draw the line? The folly of liberty is that it's much more complex than just something we should all have. What specific rights should we get? And who should get which rights? Are there circumstances under which rights should be denied or even revoked? And which limits should be put on any given right? In the interest of saving lives, do we give up our right to not wear masks? How about our right to own guns, or our right to go to church or to protest? The elders of the village are so obsessed with their own liberty that they are willing to deny all liberty to their children. In the same way, the United States' unhealthy obsession with liberty has prevented it from providing universal health care, addressing the problem of gun violence, and containing a deadly pandemic. It's fine to care about your liberty, but allowing people to die because you don't like being told what to do is just plain wrong. Even the fascists in the village break their oath to save a man's life. We live in extraordinary times, and sometimes that will mean making extraordinary sacrifices. It might hurt to give up a little bit of liberty, but I promise it doesn't hurt as much as dying from COVID. Wear a mask. It's the right thing to do.